All right, in this lesson, we are kind of combining like 5-3, 5-4, and 5-5, some parts of each of it together here. So in this first part, we are going to talk about congruent triangles. So if we're just talking about two triangles and proving if they're congruent, we would want to know and see all the angles are congruent, that kind of match up and correspond, and all the sides that correspond are congruent to each other. So since it's saying that these triangles are congruent, we can go ahead and mark that in our picture. So we're going to use arc marks and slash, which we call tick marks. So if you notice, A is the first letter of our, and that means that since E is the first letter of our second part here, then we know that those are going to be congruent to each other based on their positioning. So anything that is second, and then the second letter here, F, C, is going to be congruent to F. And of course, lastly, we have our last letter, which is B, and it is going to correspond to our D. And I'm going to go ahead and give it 3 tick mark or arc marks. So notice that I have different markings for the two pairs of angles. Now we're going to move to sides. So I have the first two letters, AC, which would be this side right here. I'm going to go ahead and put a single tick mark. And I know it's going to match up with the first two letters over here, so EF. And then I'm going to look and I see my last two letters, CB, and I see my last two letters, FD. And then, of course, now I have my last side, which would be AB and ED, and I'm going to give those 3 tick marks. So I want you to go ahead and mark your picture for number 2 based on the triangle congruence statement there of what sides would be congruent to each other and what angles would be congruent to each other, and then push play to check when you're ready. All right, double check your answer for number 2, that you have Q with the same markings that T have, that you have R with the same arc marks, a number of arc marks that U has, S and V, and then of course tick marks QR matching up with TU, there we go, and then the other sides. Now we're going to write the congruence statement down here. So for this one, I start with B. B has 3 arc marks and C has 3 arc marks. So I'm going to start writing C here first, since B is first and it has the same markings there. A on this triangle, A has 1 arc mark. So over here on this triangle, the one that has 1 arc mark is D. And then our D on this triangle has 2 arc marks, and over here A has 2 arc marks. So kind of a trickier one on that one when they're attached, but kind of flipped around. I want you to go ahead and try number 4 and push pause to try it, and then push play to check when you're ready. And you should have BAE, B corresponding to B, C corresponding to A, and D corresponding to E. So what we're going to do in this next section is we're going to actually write the congruence, triangle congruence statement, but from the information given to us. So if it helps, just go ahead and draw 2 triangles and label them. And start with R and T, put a tick mark, and then U and W on the other one and put the same tick mark. And then we have RS, so put that an S there, and it's going to have double tick marks. That's going to match up with UV. And then, of course, our last one is congruent there. So our triangle congruence statement would be, let's start with R, and then we can go to TRTS is congruent to triangle. And if we start at R, we're going to over here start at U, and then go to W, and then V. All right, go ahead and try number 6 on your own. Push pause, try it, and then push play to check when you're ready. So even if you had a different order, A should still be corresponding to G in the same positioning. So if you didn't have it first, if you had them both second, that's fine. B should be corresponding to H, and C should be corresponding to I. All right, so now we're going to talk about, instead of having to have all 3 angles and all 3 sides, that's a lot of pairs. That's 6 pairs of corresponding parts. We have some shortcuts. So the shortcuts, there are 5 of them. The first one is SSS, which is written right here, which stands for side, 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 meaning we have all 3 sides of one triangle that correspond and are congruent to the 3 sides on the other triangle, so those triangles are congruent. The other method is side angle side, or SAS, and that means we have a side, an angle that is included, meaning sandwiched between, touching both the sides, and then we have that same thing on our other triangle. And those triangles then would be congruent. The third way is angle side angle, ASA, and that means that we have an angle, a side that is touching both those angles, and we don't skip any parts or have space. It's one right after the other. And so that side is called an included side, just like up above where we saw the included angle. The second to last one, angle side, means we have 2 angles and then that next side. And the last one is going to be hypotenuse leg, which sounds totally different, doesn't it? But it is special because it is a right triangle that we are using. And the hypotenuse is, of course, the longest side, and a leg is just another side. So 2 sides, one of them having to be the hypotenuse in a right triangle, which will get us congruent triangles, but only if they are right triangles. So here's our recap. What works? SSS, SAS, ASA, AAS, and HL. What doesn't work is our SSA, or the other direction of that. We don't spell bad words in math. And no AAA. So why not AAA? Angle, angle, angle. So we have a triangle here. We have another equilateral, which is also equiangular, right? So if you notice, we have 60, 60, and 60 degrees. So all the angles are the same, but look at this. These sides are all 2, and these sides are all 5. So these triangles are not congruent. So AAA does not work. All right, so included, super important. Kind of call it the Oreo cookie sandwich, meaning you have to have them touch, just like in an Oreo sandwich, both the outer crunchy chocolate cookie parts are sandwiching the white center. So if we look here, for example, YS is one side of our sandwich, ES is the other side. What is the angle between the two? Angle E. It is the included angle. It's the one that's touching both of those sides. So then we have an ES, and then we have a YS. So S is going to be your included angle, the one between those two. And then we have a YS and a YE, which again is going to sandwich your angle Y. All right, so what can we mark? One of the most important things here. I'm going to highlight 1, 3, and 4. So if you want to star or circle those are the most common ones that we are going to be using. So this first one being the reflexive property means it shares that center side, which means we can add a tick mark to it. Vertical angles we know are across from each other, so there's those arc marks that show that those are congruent to each other. And number 4, if we have our arrows, which means we have parallel lines, then we can mark our alternate interior angles, which are on either side of that transversal line, which we can actually also mark with a tick mark because they share that. So reflexive again. You can also mark any bisector things. For example, a segment being bisected, you can put tick marks. You can mark perpendicular bisector. So again, bisecting, so tick marks at the bottom there. Angle bisector, so putting some arc marks because it's being bisected. And midpoint is basically being bisected, right? 2 tick marks on either side when it's the midpoint. The others we don't use as often. We'll look more at the third angles theorem tomorrow when we do our proofs and talk about that one. We do not assume anything, even if it's not in the given. So the only things we're kind of looking for, which we're going to see a lot of, is going to be that reflexive when they share a side, sometimes an angle, but reflexive is probably the number one most used. And then we're going to be looking for vertical, and then we're going to be looking for those parallel lines to mark the alternate interior. Those are kind of your main three that we want to look for. So let's start marking. Looking at A, we can go ahead and mark that shared segment there. We're going to label anything with an arc mark with an A for angle, and then anything with a tick mark with an S. So we have an A, and then an A, and then an S. We kind of work our way around the triangle. We don't cut across and pick something up and then jump across over, back over. We just kind of work our way around. So AAS, we circle that and we're done. Moving to B, marking that middle segment, because again, reflexive. We already have one tick mark, so I'm going to go ahead and mark it with 2. We have our parallel lines, which means we can mark those alternate interior. So we have a tick mark S, we have an arc mark A, we have a tick mark S. So SAS is what we want to mark there for B. For C, we have this segment here is bisecting this angle KLM. So that means that this angle is going to be congruent to this angle, and we're going to go ahead and put 2 arc marks in there. And then we are going to mark our middle segment. We already have K and M, that's already on the picture there. So now arc mark with an A, arc mark with an A, and an S. So A, S. And we have the same markings on both triangles. What if we didn't? Well, that would be a big problem. If, for example, we had this marking here, notice we have 2 sides and an angle, but this one, the angle's included. This one, the angle's not between the 2 sides. So these would not be congruent. They have to have the same markings on both triangles for it to be a yes. All right, moving down here, putting your tick mark here. And now we have a right angle, which of course we have one over here as well. So when we have a right angle, we want to check for HL. HL stands for that hypotenuse leg, which I do have the hypotenuse and I do have a leg. So we would circle HL in this case. When they're not touching, you can't add any additional markings. So here all we have is an angle and a side. So that is not congruent. We need another angle or maybe our hypotenuse, another side, in order for us to say they're congruent. Go ahead and try F, pause, and then push play to check when you're ready. Hopefully you said angle, side, angle. No additional information can be marked because they're not touching. AAA, not a reason, so not congruent. You would need a side. Marking here the reflexive, and it's HL, right angle triangle, and we have a hypotenuse and a leg. Putting our tick mark here for reflexive, again, right angle, we have the hypotenuse, we have a leg. What's missing? What additional information do we need for these last 2? Well, we want side, angle, side. So I have a side, I have an angle, but I'm missing my other side, which would be this one right here. So that's AC, and I would want it to be congruent over here to this side, which would be, if we did A to C, then it should be F to E, F, E, and we would want those congruent. Go ahead and try this last one. What would we need for side, side, side if we already have 2 sides? What's the pair of congruent parts that we're missing? Go ahead and write those out on that line. Push play to check when you're ready. And hopefully you said RT needs to be congruent to XZ. R is close to the 2 tick marks, so X being close to the 2 tick marks, we should have R matching up with X when we write out our congruence part. All right, and there's a recap of your 5 reasons. Make sure again to be looking for reflexive, vertical, parallel lines that you can mark alternate interior angles, and any other additional given information that you could mark in the pictures.